Everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I am super excited to share with all of you my attempt at duping the Pat McGrath Bridgerton II collection. So I did a video like this for the first Bridgerton Pat McGrath release, and you guys seemed to like it, so I figured I would do this again for this collection. This is the look that I came up with, so if you're interested in seeing a lot of comparison swatches and how I came up with today's look, then just stick around. So before we dive into my collection, let's first just talk through this release. So I don't know if it was just me, but I was personally really surprised when Pat McGrath made this announcement. I feel like the Bridgerton 1 collection didn't actually come out that long ago. So I have heard some speculation from folks that maybe the Bridgerton 1 collection was supposed to be a lot earlier, and then because of supply chain issues, it got delayed, and now we're just having both collections really close to each other. It does seem like there is a lot going on between Pat McGrath and Bridgerton though. So we have the second season coming out, and for the second season, Pat McGrath makeup will be used throughout the series. And I was kind of surprised about that, honestly, because I feel like what Pat McGrath is really known for is really beautiful runway looks that are often colorful and a little bit edgy. Whereas the makeup on Bridgerton is very, very natural, very subtle. And so even when it comes to these Bridgerton Pat McGrath releases, they're very much loosely inspired by Bridgerton, I would say. The packaging is definitely very Bridgerton, but the shades and the looks you get from them are not really what you'll see on the series. So I don't know, I'm curious to hear from you guys what you guys think about this collab. Personally, I like Bridgerton, but I wouldn't say I'm a huge stan, and so I'm not really going to be buying everything in the collection just because it's Bridgerton. For me, it really depends on how unique the collection is compared to my existing Pat McGrath and other makeup collection, which is why I wanted to do today's video. So for any of you who are still deciding about the collection, hopefully this helps in case you have some of these other products in your collection. And also, since of course no one has the collection yet, hopefully today's look and demo gives you guys a sense of what kinds of looks you could maybe get if you do pick up this collection. So I hope this video is helpful for you guys from that standpoint. So now let's run through the actual products that we have. So this is actually a pretty big release. It's even bigger than the prior Bridgerton drop. So we once again have a 6-pan eyeshadow palette. So this is in her cardboard packaging. And I don't know about you guys, but the moment I saw this, my first thought was, isn't this like pretty much exactly like the other one? I mean, obviously this one has more of a green tinge to it, whereas the prior one was more blue in tone. But especially the two mattes plus that skin show shade look pretty much the same. I mean, even all the embossments are the same. So I was a little bit underwhelmed when I first saw this picture. I think the looks that you can get from this are still pretty different from the previous one, just because you do have 3 shimmers, 2 of which are in her Blitz Astral formula, and the shimmers are the ones that are a little bit more different. That said, I do wish that she had at least switched up the mattes a little bit more instead of having pink and plum again. I think she could have done something that was a lot more different. That said, I really love the eyeshadow look that I did today, so if you guys don't have these shades in your collection, it might be worth picking up this palette still. The next big item that came out with this release is this Blushing Delights Blush and Highlight palette. And this one is pretty unique because for her last Bridgerton release, she basically came out with something in this type of format, which is similar to her holiday release. So it's basically 2 blushes and a highlight. So this one has 3 blushes and a highlight, which is an improvement from that standpoint. And it's a totally different type of packaging. Also, this is in a baked formula, which is pretty exciting. I always love baked formulations. That said, for me, what's really turning me off from this release is the packaging. It looks very, very bulky. There's a lot of space that looks like it's kind of wasted, and it looks like it's going to be pretty sizable, so not something that's going to fit really easily in your blush drawer. So for me, I think this is probably gonna be a pass. If the formula is really good, I hope she'll just release it in a different sort of packaging in the future. The part of this collection I am definitely shopping though is this lipstick collection. So if you guys are familiar with Pat McGrath's lipsticks, for a long time she had her Luxe Transformula, which was her satin formulation. And then over the past couple of years, she's been discontinuing that. And so at this point, you can't buy any more satin lipsticks on her website. And so it looks like behind the scenes, she's been reformulating that. And so now we have what's called the SatinAllure lipstick. And she's come out with 6 shades, 3 in peachy packaging and 3 in this light blue packaging. The light blue ones correspond to the more blue undertone shades, whereas the pink peach packaging corresponds to the warmer tone shades. And so for me, I am really drawn in by these warmer tone satin lipsticks. So I'm definitely going to pick up at least one of them to test out this new formula, and possibly some more. We'll see. But I really love Pat McGrath lipsticks, so I'm glad that she's coming out with a new satin formulation. The other 2 items in this release are kind of random, I would say, from my perspective at least. So we have this body shimmer, which is kind of an interesting choice because I feel like in Bridgerton they don't really have a lot of shimmer, if any shimmer, even on their eyes, let alone on their body. And this is the first time Pat McGrath has done a body shimmer. For me, I'm not someone who ever wears body shimmers, so this is a definite pass for me. But I did think it was interesting that she branched out into body shimmer for this collection. And then finally, we have this Legendary Wear Velvet Kohl eyeliner. I am a huge fan of Pat McGrath's Permagel eyeliners, but I don't really feel particularly moved to pick out a new one, especially one that's black. I typically prefer dark brown for my eyeliners. And so this one's a pass for me, but I did think it was interesting that she included this. My sense is that for this, it will definitely be re-released at some point in normal packaging. There's really nothing Bridgerton about this other than the box that it comes in. So those are all of the products that came in this Bridgerton II release. So without further ado, let's go into duping these products from my existing makeup collection. So normally I would start out with eyeshadow since that's typically what I'm most excited about with new releases. But this release is kind of unique because the lipsticks are actually what really drew me in. So I'm going to start out by just going through my existing lipstick collection and pulling some shades that I think look similar to these new shades that Pat McGrath has released. And I'll do some swatches just to see how these shades in my existing collection compare with these new releases. So to start out, let's talk about Venusian Peach, which is described as a light peachy nude. And this is definitely the shade I'm most excited about because this is the type of lipstick that I reach for on an everyday basis. So I do have several of these sorts of shades already in my collection. Starting out, I have Nude Romance from Charlotte Tilbury. If you watched my best of 2021 lipstick collection video, this was one of my favorites. And swatching this, I think it actually looks pretty similar to Venusian Peach. Venusian Peach might just be a little bit lighter. And she hasn't actually put out arm swatches or any swatches on the lips yet in the promo pics. So we only have these swatches against a white background to work off of right now. I also have Kitten Mischief from Lisa Eldridge. This is also one of my daily favorites. This is much more of a satin, slightly sheer formulation. So at least based on how she's described these lipsticks, they should have a satin shine finish and medium buildable coverage. So it might actually be quite similar to Kitten Mischief. Another possible dupe is this Dahlia shade from Wayne Goss's lipstick line. So this is also quite a peachy shade. So yeah, this one looks quite similar to the promo pics. Maybe this one's the closest color-wise so far. And then finally, I have Spice from Victoria Beckham. This is much more brown in undertone. So yeah, this would not be a good dupe. So I guess to start off, maybe I'll put on Dahlia today since this one does look like it's the most similar to the pictures. And this is actually a shade I don't think I've worn for you guys very much. So in case you're curious what this looks like, here we have it on the lips. On the lips, it definitely looks a little bit brighter than in swatch form. For me, this is not my favorite peachy nude. It is a little bit more pinky and bright than what I normally go for if I really just want a nude lip, but it is really pretty if you're doing a more natural makeup day. Depending on how today's look ends up, I might end up changing this lip, but let me know in the comments how you guys like this shade. So moving right along, let's go into Nude Romantique 2. This is described as a cool, neutral, pink nude. And there is an original Nude Romantique that comes in her Blitz Trans formula. That is a very different shade. It's a warm-toned, medium dark pink. So I guess this is just very loosely inspired by that one. And when I saw this shade, the first thing I thought of was Venus in Furs, which I have in her Matte Trans formula. So totally different formulation, but let's see how this swatch looks. Okay, yeah, I think it's overall a very similar shade. Maybe Nude Romantique 2 is just a little bit lighter, a little bit more nude. Another shade I thought of was Sweet Cheeks from Huda Beauty. This one is a little bit on the lighter side. So yeah, that actually might be a pretty good dupe for Nude Romantique 2. This is also a satin lipstick, one of my favorite formulas. And then the one other shade I thought of was Soft Core, which I have in this mini. This is in Pat McGrath's Matte Trans formula. It's more of a cool toned pink. So yeah, not as good of a dupe. So I think in my collection, Sweet Cheeks is probably the closest to Nude Romantique 2. So next, let's look at Veiled Rose, which is a mid-toned mauve pink. So Soft Core is a little bit like Veiled Rose, but Veiled Rose I think is a lot more rosy and a little bit more muted, whereas there's a bit of a fuchsia tone here. Sweet Cheeks is also, I think, a pretty good dupe for Veiled Rose. Let me actually look at these again. I feel like Nude Romantique 2 and Veiled Rose look pretty similar, with Veiled Rose just being a little bit more rosy. So another shade I thought of was Executive Realness. This is probably a little bit too fuchsia, but yeah, I think a little bit bright. So yeah, I don't think I actually have a shade quite like Veiled Rose. I typically don't go as much for these mauvey rosy shades because I find that sometimes the cool undertones aren't very flattering against my golden undertone skin, but I am tempted, so maybe I'll pick up that shade. We'll see. Next up, we have Infatuation, which is a vivid, cool tone berry pink. So this one is maybe a better comparison with Executive Realness. Executive Realness, again, is in the Matte Trans formula, so totally different formulation. But Infatuation does look a little bit more plummy. So let me pull out some other lipsticks. So I have my two Luxe Trans lipsticks from Pat McGrath. This was her original satin formulation, which has since been discontinued. So let me go in first with Unnatural Natural. This is much more brown in undertone than Infatuation. And here we have 35mm. Okay, that's maybe a little bit more red in comparison to Infatuation. So overall, still, I would say Executive Realness is probably the shade I have that's most similar. Next, we have Elson 5, which is described as a true blue red. And I have here Elson 2 in her Matte Trans. So this might be a pretty similar shade. I'm not sure if she changes all of the shades for Elsons or if all the Elsons are pretty similar, but here is Elson 2 for comparison. I do really love this shade. It's one of my favorite red lipsticks. Some of my other favorites are this Becca lipstick over here. This is W Rouge. This one is much more of a brick red, so definitely not a blue toned red. Then we have Janet Rust from Gucci, and this one's probably also more, yeah, definitely a little bit more warm in undertone. So yeah, I don't actually have that many blue reds, I guess. Probably Elson 2 is the most similar. So next up we have Negligee, and this is a neutral pink beige. And I don't really have many shades like this in my collection. Looking at this, I think actually this Victoria Beckham Spice shade might be the most similar that I have to Negligee. Maybe between that and Nude Romance, Negligee sort of looks like a mix between these two. But yeah, actually Nude Romance might be a decent dupe. I think Nude Romance just has a slightly less pinky undertone to it, but overall they look pretty similar. Finally, we have Entranced, which is described as a warm flesh rose. And when I heard that description, the first thing I thought about was Flesh 6, which is in her lip gloss formula. And this is often described by her as a warm rose or a brownie rose. So let's just swatch that over here. This is one of my favorite shades from her. Entranced, at least in the picture, looks way more plummy in undertone. I was actually kind of surprised at how Entranced looked based on the description. To me, looking at the picture, I would say Entranced looks a lot more like one of these. Maybe it looks most like Unnatural Natural. Yeah, I think actually that is a pretty good shade comparison. So we'll see. Maybe the final pictures on the lips and with the swatches might look a little bit different than these. But overall, I would say based on these comparisons, I do think I have a decent number of shades in my existing collection that are quite similar to these new shades she's coming out with. Veiled Rose is probably the one I have the least similarities to. So I think that Venusian Peach and Negligee are the ones that I'll be eyeing once this release comes out. Let me know in the comments down below if you guys are going to be picking any of these up. I'm pretty sure I will pick up at least one just because I've been waiting for her to revamp her satin lipstick formula. So hopefully with this release, it means she's going to come back in full force with these new SatinAllure formulas, and hopefully it's a really comfortable formula. So now let's get into the part of this video that I'm personally most excited about, which is the eyeshadows. So to dupe this eyeshadow palette, I brought out a bunch of my Pat McGrath palettes and also a few of my Natasha Denona palettes, since of course the Pat McGrath ones should be the most similar in formulation, and Natasha Denona also has a great, somewhat similar formula as well. So the first shade in this palette looks like one of her classic Skin Show shades. So these are basically a really sheer, pearlescent kind of highlighter type of eyeshadow. And this one is called Refinement, and it's described as a luminous pale rose gold highlighter. So let's see, we have a few different options. So I have first off my Huetopian Dream palette. So there's a really nice Skin Show shade here, mostly champagne, but a little bit of peachy gold in it. So yeah, I think that one actually looks very similar. So I'll do a few more swatches, but this is starting out pretty strong. In general though, her Skin Show shades aren't gonna vary that much. So if you have any Pat McGrath palette, I'm sure you could use the Skin Show shade from that one and it'll still give a really similar effect. So let's see, we also have here Midnight Sun. This one is maybe a little bit less rosy, but definitely has a little bit of that almost kind of oranginess that you get with rose golds. Just for good measure though, I'm gonna also take out Subversive just to see how that one compares. I think this will be a little bit too warm toned. Okay, yeah, this one is definitely almost bronzy in its shift. So yeah, I think in today's video, I'm just gonna go with Huetopian Dream, but you're definitely fine with any of her Skin Show shades. So the next shade is called Regency Romance, and this and the other matte are the two that look very, very similar to her original Bridgerton release. This one is described as a peony pink satin matte. So for the last Bridgerton release, I duped it with this shade over here, and this is called Electrique. So let's see how this is looking. Okay, yeah, this looks very similar, I would say, to the Regency Romance shade. Regency Romance has maybe a little bit of a warmer undertone to it. So let's see if there's anything else. Let me go back into Huetopian Dream, and we have this shade over here, which is almost more like a coral shade, so maybe a little bit too bright. Okay, yeah, I think that Regency Romance maybe looks like a bit of a cross between these two shades. Maybe for the sake of doing something a little bit different in this look, I might go in with this shade from Huetopian Dream, just so we don't end up with the exact same mattes on the lids. In general though, I would say with these two mattes, if you have a bunch of Pat McGrath palettes, you probably have something similar because she loves her pinks. And so there's a lot of pink in most Pat McGrath collections. So next up we have one of the Blitz Astral shades in this collection. So this is one of the more unique shades that Pat McGrath is really famous for. This one is called Diamond's Desire. So when I saw this, the first thing I thought of was Bronze Seduction. There's a Blitz Astral shade in this palette that looks very similar to what we see here. So that's this guy over here. So let me just swatch this. It is a really beautiful glittery shade. So yeah, I feel like this is quite similar. As you can see, it has that same multi-dimensionality to it. Just to give you guys some other options though, I also took out Retro from Natasha Denona, and I feel like Glitz and Psychedelic might be slightly related. Let's see. Okay, yeah, maybe a little bit too light in comparison to this shade. The Pat McGrath shade does look like it has a bit of body to it. And then looking at Huetopian Dream again, this bronzy rose shade over here might be somewhat similar, but it doesn't really have that shame sparkly element that you get with the shade from Bronze Seduction, which is really flaky and multidimensional. So for today's look, I'm definitely gonna go in with this guy over here. So the next shade we have is Forbidden Amour, and this is described as a velvety plum matte. So let's go back in with this Celestial Odyssey palette from Pat McGrath. And this was the shade I used to dupe the other Bridgerton palettes matte shade. It might also work pretty well as a dupe in this guy as well. I feel like the one that we're seeing in this new palette is maybe a little bit deeper and more plummy, but this is still a decent dupe. So now let me go into Celestial Divinity, which is the previous year's holiday palette, and we also have a shade here that's like a plummy matte. This might be a little bit purpley. Okay, I feel like the Forbidden Amour shade is kind of between these two. Now going back into Huetopian Dream, we also have a plummy matte over here. A little bit more brown in undertones, so, well, I don't know, actually might be a decent dupe. Again, I feel like you could either mix these two or these two to get a pretty good dupe. Now going back into Bronze Seduction, we also have this plum matte. Yes, Pat McGrath likes her plum mattes. So that one is a little bit on the deep side. And in case you're curious what's happening to the swatches over here, my skin is a little bit dry near my elbow, so I find that powdery mattes don't stick very well, but it's not the problem of the eyeshadows. So overall, I feel like I don't have a plum matte that is exactly like this guy, but maybe I can mix these two together and get something quite similar. So next up we have the two Blitz Astral shades. So the first one we have is called Daring Dandy. Very interesting name. And this is a Pastel Aqua Metallic. So of course, when I heard Pastel, the first thing I thought of was the brand new Natasha Denona Pastel palette. So this does have a couple shades that could be good contenders. So we have here Adriatic and Mint Frost. So here is Adriatic, maybe a little bit deeper in comparison to Daring Dandy. And also this is the smooth metallic formulation, so it's not gonna be as sparkly as the Pat McGrath. And then here we have Mint Frost, which is a bit more sparkling, so this might be a better match. And the shade is looking very similar to Daring Dandy. And the last shade I thought of for this comparison was from Circo Loco from Natasha Denona. So we have this shade called Snow Cone. This might be a little bit more on the blue side, but let's see. Ooh, that is such a pretty shade. Okay, yeah, this is definitely a little bit more blue. So overall, I think Mint Frost is the closest dupe that I have in my collection. So the last shade we have is Forever Charmed. This is described as a divinely deepened chartreuse. So this is a shade that definitely attracted me when I saw this palette come out. But I do think there's a couple shades that I already have from Pat McGrath that might be pretty good dupes. So let's first go into Subversive. Let's see, where did I put that? Okay, here we go. So here we have Subversive, and this shade over here, I think it's Gigabyte, is so beautiful. One of my favorite Pat McGrath shades. So let me just swatch that over here. So richly pigmented. Like, look how much is still on my finger. Okay, I think this is a very good dupe for Forever Charmed. It's also in her Blitz Astral formulation, so this might actually be basically the same shade, but look at that. So pretty. And then one other shade I thought of was from Celestial Divinity. I think this might be Megabyte. Basically, one of them is Megabyte and one of them is Gigabyte. They look very, very similar, but this one is not in her Blitz Astral formulation. So let me swatch this guy over here. So it's just a little bit less gold, a little bit more cool toned, but they are very similar, as you can see from these swatches. But for today's video, I'll use the one in Subversive just so we have the same formulation. And then finally, I was not that happy with my comparison swatches over here, so I did also dig into my retro palette from Natasha Denona, and I swatched Groove and Rebellion. So this is Groove and this is Rebellion, and I think actually Groove is probably the closest match to Forbidden Amour, so I'm going to use that in today's look. So before I wash off all these swatches, here they are close up. So first off, for duping refinement, I have from Huetopian Dream, the Skin Show shade, and then the Skin Show shade from Midnight Sun, and then from Subversive. I'll be using this guy in today's look. And then for duping Regency Romance, I have the shade from Celestial Odyssey, Electrique, and then I have the shade from Huetopian Dream, and I'll be using this one in today's look. Then for duping the Diamond's Desire, I have this Blitz Astral shade from Bronze Seduction, a couple of shades from Natasha Denona's Retro palette, and I have this shade from Huetopian Dream. And I'll be using the Bronze Seduction one in today's look. Then for Forbidden Amour, I have this shade from the Celestial Odyssey palette, this one from Celestial Divinity, Huetopian Dream, Bronze Seduction, and then I have these two shades from the Retro palette, and I'll be using this one, which was Groove. For Daring Dandy, we have these two shades from the Natasha Denona Pastel palette, Adriatic and Mint Frost. I'll be using Mint Frost today. And then we have Snow Cone from Circo Loco, also from Natasha Denona. Then for Forever Charmed, we have this shade from Subversive and this one from Celestial Divinity, and I'll be using the Subversive one today. So without further ado, let's get into today's eyeshadow look. So I'm going to start out with this bright shade from Huetopian Dream, and looking now at her website a little bit more, I am a little bit confused about how this shade's supposed to look, because I'm noticing that when she did the swatches, the shade comes across looking much more muted and cool toned, whereas in the pictures just of the shade itself, it looks much more warm toned. So I don't know, I might actually cool this down a little bit with this shade over here to try to get more of a match. But let's first just sweep this all over the crease area. And I love any excuse to use Huetopian Dream. This is rapidly becoming one of my favorites, if not my overall favorite Pat McGrath palette. All right, so here we have that shade all over the lids. Let me just tap a little bit into this shade over here, just to cool it down, make a little bit of a better match. It's a nice match for the lip color I have today. And now with the reference number 14, I'm going to go into Groove from my Natasha Denona Retro palette. Use this in the outer portion. And for me, part of the motivation of doing this kind of video is I want to see how much I like this kind of look from this palette, because just because you have all of these palettes in your collection doesn't really mean you're gonna, grab for all of them at once and put together this look. And so if it's a look I really like, then that kind of weighs in favor of picking up the palette, even if I already have a lot of the shades. But if it's a look that I think I'm just gonna do once and then never really do it again, then there's not really much point to own the palette. And it's been hard for me to get a really good read on how these two mattes will look, in part because I feel like in the promo pics that Pat McGrath has shared so far, for the most part, she's really highlighting the shimmery shades, and a lot of them don't even use these pinky shades. Now I'm just gonna go back in with a little bit more of that original matte shade, just to sort of blend everything together. Yeah, there's just one picture I've seen so far where she does use these mattes in the look, so I'll flash that up for you guys so you can see. But that's basically what I'm using at the moment as a point of comparison to try to get these mattes to be the right shade. All right, I think that's a pretty good match overall. So now let me also just do this on my lower lash line. So first starting with that bright shade from Huetopian Dream, I'm just gonna sweep that all over the lower eye bag. Be pretty generous with this so we have a nice hazy lower lash line look. Then with my reference number 2, I'm going into Groove and sweeping this just on the outer portion and then bringing it inwards. And now for the shade I love the most, this guy over here from Subversive. Let's just put this all over. Such a pretty shade. It's been a while since I've used this shade, so I was very excited that this release gave me an excuse to bust it out. If you want something that's green but still super wearable, this is a really great shade since it basically has kind of an olive meets gold shade to it. So pretty. Very, very nice. Now I'm going in with my reference number 21 brush just to further refine that a little bit. And then going back in with a little bit of Groove, I'm going to just really deepen up that outer corner area. And then just also blend a little bit around the edges. And now with my reference number 26, I'm going into this shade, which is the Skin Show shade. And I'm putting this on the inner corners and also a little bit on the brow bone as well. So now I'm just gonna pause for a quick second and show you guys this look, since this is one of the looks that she did showcase for this palette. So you can definitely just stop here, put on some liner, some lashes, and call it a day. But of course, I want to use all of the shades in this duped palette. So now I'm going to go in with Mint Frost, and I'm going to take that reference number 2 brush again and just dip it into this shade. And then I'm going to sweep this on the lower lash line. In the look that Pat McGrath did, she just used that chartreuse shade again on the lower lash line. So this is where we deviate from the original look. And to top things off, I'm going to go into this shade in Bronze Seduction now. And let me see, where do I want to put this? Inner corner or center of the lid? Man, this is such a pretty look already, but I think I'll just try to scatter this sort of in the center of the lid just for some extra shine there. An alternative look that you could do if you do pick up this palette is just to use this shade all over the lid, which would be really, really pretty as well. Alrighty, so I think that just brought a slightly more multi-dimensional aspect to this. So I'm just going to go back in with my reference number 21 and just refine any edges. Alrighty, so here we have the completed eyeshadow look. So I'm going to go off camera, apply some liner, and be back to go into the blushes and highlights. So here we have the final eyeshadow look. What do you guys think? So I'm really digging this. This is a really fun look. I would say that it's even more fun than the first Bridgerton look that I did. So if you didn't pick up that eyeshadow palette and you don't have these shades already, I feel like this is a pretty fun palette to play around with. And let me just zoom you guys out a little bit so you can see the full effect. So the next part of this collection to dupe is this blush and highlight palette. So she calls this the Blushing Delights. And I think this has been by far the most controversial part of this release. On the one hand, folks have been really excited about Pat McGrath blushes and highlights, and I really love those formulas, so I am generally always interested when Pat McGrath releases any cheek products. But the packaging for this definitely leaves a little to be desired. It frankly looks really cheap in the photos, and so yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm not picking this up, but let's see if there's anything in my collection that I can use to dupe this on my face today. So these are all new shades, which is quite exciting, but I think they're quite similar to some of the shades that she released in her Divine Blush collection. So I have here a bunch of possible dupes. So first, let's go in with the highlight. So there's basically one highlighter that I thought of the moment I saw this collection, and that is her Golden Nectar highlight. So this is one of her Divine Glow highlighters. So let's swatch this guy over here. Okay, so looking at this in comparison to the pictures, I will say I think Golden Nectar is a lot more peachy in tone. Let me give you guys a bigger swatch. Whereas the Champagne Venus that she's launching has much more of a yellow tinge to it. Interesting. For reference, I'll also swatch Venus Nectar, which came in this little package over here. So this one over here is even more, I would say, in that peachy direction. So yeah, definitely no gold there. And then we also have the Holiday Collection highlighter. And this one, yeah, also does not have enough yellow gold in it. Alrighty, so actually this highlighter might be somewhat unique as far as Pat McGrath highlights goes. She did come out with that super yellow gold highlighter with the last Bridgerton release, and I felt that that one could maybe be duped by some of the eyeshadows that she's come out with, but this is much more of a pale gold. For today's look though, I'll go in with Golden Nectar because that's definitely all of these three the most gold. So next up we have Budding Romance, and this looks like a cool tone pink that would be pretty bright on the skin. So not exactly my cup of tea in terms of blushes, but what I thought of with this one is it looked kind of similar to Love Struck. So let's give that a good swatch. Love Struck is also sort of almost a fuchsia pink. Okay, yeah, I do think these look pretty similar in swatch. And while we're at it, I feel like Berry Brilliance looks a little bit similar to Paradise Venus. Definitely a different undertone. So Paradise Venus is a lot warmer in tone. It's a terracotta shade, whereas this Berry Brilliance is much cooler in tone. And then for Aphrodisia, I have a few possibilities. So first off, we have Nude Venus. So this is sort of peachy pinky. Let's see. Okay, I would say that this is looking kind of similar to Aphrodisia. Aphrodisia looks like it has a bit more shine than this one over here. Let me build it up a little bit. But the actual shade is somewhat similar. And then finally, let me go in with Desert Orchid. This one might be a little bit more orangey in comparison to Aphrodisia. But let's see. Okay, yeah, I feel like Aphrodisia looks a little bit like a cross between these two in terms of shade, but the finish of the blush looks a lot more shimmery than these, which are in her satin pearl finish. And so I guess for today's look, I'll try to do kind of a mix of all these blushes on my face, just so we can sort of emulate what this palette might look like. So to start off, I'm gonna go in with my Artist Large into Paradise Venus and just tap a little bit of this sort of on the outer portions of my cheeks, bringing that up towards the temples. I'm gonna try to keep this pretty light since this is definitely a shade you can easily go overboard with if you have a skin tone like mine. And then I'm gonna now start going in with Love Struck just to kind of cool that down a little bit. And I'm also gonna bring this upwards as well. It's always fun just mixing your blushes and playing around with them. Alrighty, so here we have the first two shades down. And so now to dupe that aphrodisia, I'm going into Nude Venus, and I'm just gonna tap that same brush in and put that on the rest of my cheeks. Such a pretty shade. And yeah, I do think that we need a little bit more warmth. So let me now go into Desert Orchid and just take a little bit of this as well. And I'm gonna layer this on top. Definitely got a lot of blush on today. Just gonna try to blend that all together. And for the highlighter, I'm going in with my Artist Small from Wayne Goss, and I'm going to sweep that all over the cheekbone area. And I'm gonna be pretty generous with this since the blushes in this collection look like they are a bit more shimmery than her other blush formula. So hopefully by upping the highlighter, we get a similar effect. And then I'm also going to take a little bit of that just down the bridge of the nose on that Cupid's bow. All right, so there we go. Here is the blush look down. Very pretty. I always love playing around with Pat McGrath blushes. So the last two items in this collection, I am definitely not going to pick up in this round. If there's amazing reviews, maybe I'll consider it, but one of the items is a body shimmer. And this is the first time Pat McGrath has come out with a body shimmer, but I never use body shimmer myself, so I'm not particularly interested in this. But I thought for the sake of today's look, I'll go in with her Holiday Highlighter, which is a pretty flaky, glittery highlighter in its own right. And I'll use this fluffy Rephr number 5 brush and just sort of put a little bit of this on my décolletage area. I actually specifically wore this dress so I would have some of my décolletage showing for you guys. So let's just put a little bit there. Okay. Nice to highlight those collarbones. But yeah, not really the type of thing I typically go for. So it's definitely not worth it to me to buy an entire body glitter. But I think if you have one of her existing highlights, it's probably good enough for this use case. I think that looks pretty. Just a little bit extra shine there. Makes me look a little bit more fit. And then the last item is this Velvet Kohl eyeliner that she came out with. This is one that I'm not going to pick up now, but potentially someday I would pick it up. I do really love her Permagel eyeliners. So today for my waterline, I went in with Black Coffee, which is a really nice deep shade. Even though it's a brown shade, you can see that it's pretty close to black. So I don't really feel particularly moved to pick up this Kohl eyeliner since I feel like I can do with this eyeliner pretty much anything I could do with that one, but we'll see. If people say it's like the best eyeliner they've ever tried, then maybe I'll pick that up after this guy runs out. So now that I've gone through all of these products and found dupes in my existing collection, it does alleviate a lot of my FOMO about this Bridgerton collection. I think for the most part, I'm fine not picking up anything other than maybe 1 or 2 lipsticks from this drop. I will say though, I like this eyeshadow look a lot more than I thought I would. I mean, I thought I would like it, but I really like this look a lot. And so I'm really glad I did today's video because this has inspired me to do more looks like this in the future, given that I do have a lot of shades that I think lend themselves towards duping this eyeshadow palette. If you don't have those shades in your collection though, and you really like this look, it might be worth considering picking up the eyeshadow palette, since it is, I think, overall a good deal, especially if you are someone who likes Bridgerton. In terms of the cheeks, I am quite happy with my existing Pat McGrath blush collection. If she comes out with more shades of her Divine Blushes, I might snap those up. But the particular shades that she included with this drop aren't really shades I use that much anyway, and between that and the packaging, I think it's a definite pass for me. That said, I do really love baked formulas, and so I hope that she comes out with this formula in a different sort of packaging sometime in the future. If so, I might pick that up. In terms of the lips, I wasn't quite sure about matching this very peachy lipstick with this overall look, but I'm actually really digging it now that it's on my face. I think normally I would have gone in with more of a nude toned lip, but I think the peach sort of brings out some of the spring vibrancy in this look and is really perfect for the current season. And so I'm glad we started out with the lips, because I probably would not have arrived at this look otherwise. So this definitely nudges me in favor of getting that peachy lipstick from this drop. On the whole, I think this is a really solid release with a really beautiful color story. Not really something that screams Bridgerton to me, but beautiful in its own right. So I'm personally just really looking forward to the next Pat McGrath release. Hopefully something that's in her more typical packaging, which I do find is a little bit more luxe. But I really enjoyed putting together today's look because I always love playing around with my Pat McGrath products. So that's it for today's video. If you guys like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. I would love to hear in the comments down below what you guys think about this collection. Are you picking up any pieces from it? And if you picked up the previous Bridgerton collection, I would love to hear what your thoughts were on that. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!